100 billion has been pumped back. How does it go out? So what it shows that there's shortage of cash, physical cash. The online channels for transfers are not working. And straight to your question, we are hearing, I think there's a breaking news by this afternoon of, I think, the University Commission allowing students to go. Between me and you, we know right now that to get 20,000 naira in Nigeria, 20,000 naira is a Herculean tax. Oh. That's 20,000 naira in cash.
Oh, cash.
If you actually get that from a POS machine, you are likely to pay over maybe 3,000 or 4,000 naira just for getting
or five.
Or five.
Even.
So it will take a very, very patriotic Nigerian student to go and look for over maybe 25,000, 30,000 because he wants to go and cast his vote, okay, to travel from wherever he is because of what happened during the strike and say, I want to go and cast my vote and come back afterwards. So the issue of the shortage of cash is going to be a big problem for the students who were even contemplating maybe they should, because they made an agitation that has been granted to them, but the next question is a move, right? All right, we come back to the political players. For me, I think I like that because the concept of vote buying, this would have been one election with the highest vote buying in the history of the world, not in the history of Africa.
Why do you say that?
Oh, we saw it in the primaries of the two leading parties, the People's Democratic Party and also the All Progressive Congress. We saw it on social media how some people took certain money, 12 million, 22 million, and were given to their wards. We saw EFCC being physically on ground. Okay? It's not something that is challenged. There was massive vote buying during the primaries and stuff. And once again, we did not hear them complaining about any things that, like you've been hearing a lot of people saying in Nigeria, you know, you didn't complain about the ASU strike, you didn't complain about the kidnapping, you didn't complain about the fuel, like you are not complaining about money. What is this thing about money that the complaint is so painful to the politicians? We know that the Nigerians are suffering it, okay? Analysts have said that it's a policy that has been rushed. You know, it was not well thought out. So there's going to be a concern on how cash is going to move. 2 days ago, if you remember, the INEC president was, the INEC commissioner was with the governor of CBN, and he was asking that for the sake of logistics, we need cash. And the governor said, we're going to supply to you anything you need. We're going to supply to you. So the cash shortage is already putting pressures on Nigeria. So if I really want to answer your question in context of what Nigerians experience on a daily basis, I would say for the fact that Nigerians in the last 3 months, almost everywhere around the country, have been buying for over 400 naira in some parts in the south, or the southeast, or the middle belt. Okay, here in Abuja where we stay, or in Lagos, you know that the fuel queues are high. So there's fuel queues. There are people who are now crying for this issue of getting cash, and there's a high level of inflation going on, and nobody's talking about it. In the midst of everything that has been happening, if you notice in the last 1 week, 2 weeks, the question of insecurity based on kidnapping went down, but you had some kind of crisis that has been happening in certain quarters. So already the polity is already heated. The polity is already charged. The average Nigerian is already feeling the heat. What I would rather say and ask is that how will it affect the election? Some of us feel that it's actually going to affect the ruling party, because the average Nigerian feels that this malaise that they are facing, this scourge that they are feeling right now in Nigeria, is actually caused by the ruling party. Some of us would have been feeling that this would have been the best time for the ruling party would have made things a bit relaxed so that people will vote. The only problem is that the current oppositions, especially for the People's Democratic Party, have not been putting a lot of fire for the current party.
It's interesting that you come from there, because when you talk about that issue now, I think there are different sides to it. So you talk about the ruling party, and you see the conspiracy theory, you know, that has been presented, put forward by some members of the ruling party. You talk about the presidential candidate of the party. He has alleged that certain elements, you know, within the presidency are trying to sabotage, you know, their efforts and the victory of the party in the elections. We also have the governor of Kaduna State talk about that. You've had several, you know, of members of the ruling party. So it is no longer, like you are saying, it is no longer an issue of the ruling party, so to speak, because when you look at it, there is also a conspiracy theory that is saying that perhaps some certain elements are interested in having an interim government, That is to foil, all the effort that have been geared up to have elections in February and March. For whatever reasons, maybe during that time there will be an interim government. And you have heard this exacerbated by the governor of Rivers State, Governor Nyesom Wike, when he said that recently. So a lot of people believe that theory. A lot of people believe that some of the untold hardship and all that's going on in the country at the moment is because of some of these theories and how they intend to implement them. So I'd like to get your view right now. I'm sure you've heard a wind, of the conspiracy theories. How does these conspiracy theories affect these election processes? Do you see it as a possibility, like some people are postulating, as a means to maybe tamper with the elections in February?
So one of the things that some of us understand about narratives like this that has been spun out on especially right now, what you call conspiracy theories, is what some of us will say that is an absence of elite consensus, where you're not having the elite of the society coming together and say, this is what we want. Rather, what we see, and some of us commend, is when you see the ethnic groups, the Pandev, the Ohanese, the Afenifere, the Middle Belt Forum, people coming to say, based on the interest and overarching interest for the country, this is the direction we think Nigeria should go. Okay? But when you come to those conspiracy theories, almost all the bloc, like all those people you called, they are all people who tend to defend their particular interest, especially those of them who are called politicians. And it takes our eyes away from what we call the office of the citizens, where the citizen literally in Nigeria is like a person who has no right. There is no meaning, there's no interpretation, there's no benefit to what it means to be called a citizen of this country. Other than that, people will just go and cast their vote, civic responsibility, but when it comes back for a return for good governance, there's nothing about it. So some of us don't want to put our eyes on those kind of focus because it's clear for what it is. If you check some of them who are house members, what bills did they move? Or distinguished members. If you check some of them who are governors, some of them try to do one or two things, but you still see that there is no overarching interest with the country. So rather, some of the people will commend for what you just said are Pan-African groups, indigenous groups, people who are very objective in how they feel that the country should be governed. And one thing that I like to say, the face of politicking in Nigeria is beginning to change. It's actually evolving. And I can tell you, going forward from this election, okay, especially in the next coming election, even governorship aspirants are going to be keenly contested for. House of Rep, look at what is happening in the National Assembly. I heard, is it over 50% of them? Is it 50?
Not return.
Okay, are not returning. Do you know what that means for a system? That is a real overhaul. There's a kind of consciousness that is already building up. So for me, the consciousness that is building up is what I'm looking at. And it's what some of us are beginning to see. Post this election, the kind of narratives, the kind of consciousness, the kind of Nigeria that is beginning to evolve.
All right, thank you for that. You spoke about elite consensus.
Yes, please.
And, I was wondering, a lot of people say this is democracy. The voice of the majority, most especially the masses, must prevail. And you know that there is always a divide between the elite and the masses. So when you say elite consensus, is it not a good thing in the real sense of it, that the elites are not even able to agree on one path, on one direction to go for this election? But I'll take your answer to that. We need to take a quick break now.
All
right, let's go on this quick break. When we return, the conversation will continue with my guest right here in the studios. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is Politics Alive. We're looking at healing after 2023 elections and the entire process, that has bruised a lot of Nigerians. And we are looking at the effect and how this is going to play out during the elections and after. And of course, I'm still in the studios with public policy analyst Tochukwu Ifemini right here in the studios. All right, you are going to talk to me about elite consensus and the appeal, the desire, the wish of the masses.
I would rather say elite consensus versus the expectation of the masses. And let me bring it together. You were asking before the break, is it not almost like, is it good that they are not involved? Every time a society moved forward, it was because a group of elite came together and said, you know what, we need to chart the interests or the cause or the narrative or the aspirations of our people. And that was what we saw all across Africa from 1956-57 down to 1960, where Kwame Nkrumah gathered Pan-Africanists for the liberation of their country. You come to Nigeria, you saw how we have what some people say they are founding fathers, but they are not the freedom fighters who came, but they were elite, okay? The season of coup came, and it was elite army officers who took us. By the time 1999, before we entered 1999, after General Abacha died, it was the elite again who brought themselves, because they're from different fields, okay? And say, you know what, we need to salvage our society. It's just like you come from a traditional, a clan, you know, a nuclear family. It's the elites of that place. And what, by the way, are those elites? Anybody that has those reason to the zenith of whatever is doing, it must not necessarily be wealthy, maybe more social influence, more power, more social appeal, you know, something like that. And they came together by 1999, and that was what gave birth to the People's Democratic Party. Okay, most of the people who were in Nandeko eventually became people that formed the AD. Okay, and those were elites already taking positions going to an election. Okay, elite consensus also played even during the time of the 1993 Hope campaign of MKO Abiola. But if you notice, from 1999 going all these years, the elite consensus, because they are of the lack of insincerity, because some of them went into politics, but they are no more giving what the people expect. It now looks like, okay, there's nothing we should look up to. Then the expectations or the aspiration of the masses were thwarted. The masses who were supposed to be shouting and say, thank you for giving us this, and now the masses now begin to revolt. Right now, I'm seeing series of pockets of revolt. There's literally no day now in the last 2 weeks in Nigeria, including today, where people are beginning to revolt one thing or the other based on what is happening. And because most of these masses are not well educated, they are not enlightened to their democratic rights and privileges, it looks like they don't even have a voice. And also because they are not organized. So when you saw the masses in the context of the NSAS trying to come together to mobilize themselves towards what they want to end police brutality, we saw how it was interpreted. We saw that a lot of elites didn't come together to even defend them. Well, look at something that happened about elite consensus at a point during the days when President Jonathan wanted to increase the fuel price, when we had the Save Nigerian Group. That was an elite consensus based on the dividends of democracy or the expectations of what the people should have. Right now, I can tell you quarter of what has happened in the last 3 years was not up to what provoked that kind of outrage in Save Nigerian Group. So we are having a group of elites that is looking like they can't even come together. That was why in the last 4 years of this administration, the political opposition towards this governance was very weak. I expect that even as People's Democratic Party are battling hard to go into election right now to get their candidate, they should be still hitting hard, especially on what is happening in the economy.
But isn't that an indication of growth, of understanding the system, especially the democratic system, knowing fully well that before 1999, we had never had a long stretch at practicing democracy? Isn't it just a reflection of the fact that, okay, so people are now getting to understand the intrigues of democracy and partisanship and all of that, and know that, well, maybe no party is actually good, so to speak, in their own way. I'm sure if time permits, we'll come to that and look at what the law says about it and all of that. But I'm thinking, isn't it a clear reflection of the fact that the Nigerian people are better understanding democracy, are better understanding partisan politics right now?
Yeah, I can't say it's a growth. If you say understanding of what they should have received over these years, I'll say yes. But if it's growth, no. And can I tell you something about this growth? What happened in Shagari's time by 1980 and the coup that happened? That was a democratic experiment that wanted to happen, and a coup happened because it was said that the politicians of that era were corrupt. And the coup started, okay, from President Buhari, who did that coup, to the president, IBB, to Abacha. We came to 1999. We had high expectation. We thought that this new yes, and the new Republic by 19 actually took off with a lot of reforms, a lot of expectation. If there was a continuous build-up, I can tell you that by now the people know what democracy means. But right now, can I tell you something? The current way in which you have practiced democracy it has not given Nigeria the status. Do you know how much we're in debt? Do you know how many people we can't have healthcare systems to ourselves? If our elites cannot even use the healthcare system on ground, and because they are elite, especially those ones exposed politically, we go abroad for their health. Their children cannot school in our schools. They cannot drink the kind of water we drink. They use jeeps. And these are also basic things.
Okay, sorry that I have to cut you. Let's quickly talk about important issues, especially with the election and post-election. You would remember that from last year, from 2022, Nigerians became excited. I think the 2022 year welcomed us around this time last year with the passage of the Electoral Act. Everybody became excited. Everybody became encouraged. You know that for once democracy will prevail, since there are laws that will guide the process. And a lot of laws, a lot of things were put into that document. And I quickly like you to reflect on a bit of them, which is Section 92, for example, talks about how candidates in political parties should behave, especially when it comes to talking to themselves, using certain languages, and all of that. Would you say that the players across the political parties have adhered strictly to this rule, in this campaigning season that is about to round off? That's one. I want you to, answer both in one breath. Now, if your answer is yes, then there may be no need. But if your answer is no, then it means that it has left a mental lacuna, for the Nigerian people. A lot of people will have that to grapple with. A lot of people have picked new enemies. I said that earlier. A lot of people have built new friendships. But some of these friendships may necessarily not be healthy, for the country, because it's a build-up of some power, and it perhaps may not be in good stead, especially for the advantage of the country. So tell us, how will this affect Nigeria after elections?
Okay, so Mr. Binga, I think my answer is no, and yes, some political players have been quite fair. The presidential candidates of some parties have been quite fair in their speech. Some have not been fair in their speech. Their media handlers have not been fair in their speech. It's almost like a war. And like you said, there have been tensions, there have been killing, there have been agitations. And I can say something is normal. I don't even expect anything less. The reason is this. It has always been our trend. And because there are no consequences, it will happen. But I will say something. The post-implication of this kind of abuses, threats, are things people do not forget. I remember in the last election, somebody said that if this election is not won like this, the country will be battered and dogs and baboons will be soaked in blood. It's a statement that up to now, Nigeria will forever remember. And we now knew what happened after that election. Okay, thank God we didn't have a country soaked in blood, but we now knew that that was the beginning of another kind of crime we had never witnessed before in this country. The statement, and there's a story behind that, by the way. We've heard the story of how people were brought and everything. Nobody has come to refute it, but well-meaning Nigerians have come to bring out their own narratives. It may be alleged, but it is what it is. All right? Now, the post-implication of this kind of statements is that it further widens the gap, the bridge, of how a particular politician will view another one. They will even tell you that all of this is just politics. It doesn't mean anything and the rest. But some of us are very careful to chronicle these words. I envisage a time in Nigeria where people are going to be very, very careful, because that's the reason why the Peace Committee tries to come to bridge them together. Somehow, with their interventions, I feel it's even a bit curtailed, because they know that there should be limits. They are also aware about the electoral injunction on that, but they know that even if we violate it, INEC is not going to slam them. And that's one of the things we are calling on INEC as a regulator in this situation. Look at the kind of comment the REC of Lagos just said some days ago. I mean, as far as INEC is the regulator, unbiased, we call them to bring out and make statements. It's just like what happened just some few hours ago. Is it today, when a tweet, somebody just tweeted, a click from the INEC on the comment that was made on the candidate of Labour Party. And right now, INEC is looking who is the person who did it and the rest. If that can happen from within INEC, and you know the implication of that, why should a regulator have somebody I mean, doing that, you should now understand what should happen post the election. So some of us, post-election is what we're concerned about. If this particular candidate win, this may be the reactions of Nigeria. If this particular win, or the ACN, or the LP, or this is what Nigeria will mean. The current economic situation in the country, we've still not dealt with it. By the time we finish at the end of this month, nobody knows, is the Naira going to be...
I really do wish that we had more time to talk about this. Our time is running out. But I want you to answer this finally before we go. What is your best suggestion to unify Nigeria after the elections, hoping and praying that it holds on the 25th of February and 11th of March as scheduled?
Like I said the last time I was here, I said I will not be surprised if it's postponed, but we also believe that it may not be postponed. This is the longest period political players have been given to play. My own advice for Nigeria, and what I'll call the office of all citizens of Nigeria to do post this election, and anybody that is going to take over power, is to concentrate first to unify the nation. And that's why you see the candidate of the PDP keeps on saying he's the unifier. Nigeria is deeply divided. This level of suspicion based on bigotry, religious intolerance, ethnic intolerance, I mean, all that has never ever been witnessed. Such that we count this particular election with religions and zones. We've heard people both on religious sides say things they're not supposed to say. If I'm the person that will take over power post 2023 election, one of the things I will promulgate, or the House of Rep members, is that henceforth hate speech from religious body, hate speech from people who want to further our divides, including even some of these social cultural organizations, will be dealt with. Because this is the beginning of the slope of a country or a nation who is trying to forge themselves into unity going out. And that's why we have seen in Rwanda, it is not a matter whether a Hutu or Tutsi, you may end up in a prison for even asking that question, because they've tested what that thing has done to them. Nigerians need to be united. And the first thing that we need to do, or anybody needs to come, both from the office of the citizens, which is all of us, those of you in the media, some of us with our initiative and our interventions that we do daily, and we call on the politicians. The issue of making Nigeria one is a business we must do, and making the nation what it's supposed to be. Nigeria is at a crossroad that it has never ever, not even 1993, when we saw how it was coming, or 1999. This particular crossroad is the most different of all, and we call people to live the ethos of our national pledge. When you look at the ethos of our national pledge, you say to defend our unity and uphold our honor and glory. And we say, so help me God. So I think it will take God to help us.
All right, that's a good way to end the conversation. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you, Mr. Benga, for having me.
All right, I have been speaking with Tochukwu Ifemene, public policy analyst and political analyst on the show, and it's been a wonderful conversation. No doubt, I'm leaving you with some of his words, maybe paraphrased, that the responsibility to unite Nigeria, to heal Nigeria, is the duty of each and every one of us, you and me inclusive. That is, when elections are come and gone, it is our responsibility to remember that, first of all, there is a nation to defend, and that together we can do it. We can achieve it. And of course, I believe that we will achieve it and get better as Nigerians. And Nigeria will never be destroyed. We will stay together forever. Thank you so much for joining us on today's edition of the program. I'll get to see you again some other time. It's been a wonderful time. Have a great evening. I'm Olubinga George.
That was a good one.
Tim Rutherford had his gun loaded. He was about to pull the trigger. Tim's a cop, but he was not aiming at a criminal. Instead, he had every intention of shooting himself.
I saw so much death, violence, destruction, families being torn apart. There was no rest in between.
Tim Rutherford never imagined the job where he swore an oath to protect and serve the community would drive him to the edge of suicide.
I just got to a breaking point to where I just couldn't pull myself out. It was like slamming the brakes on a freight train.
Tim grew up in a relatively small town in upstate New York in a poor household. His father spent what little money he made working odd jobs on drugs and alcohol. Many times, they were on the verge of being homeless.
When I was 13 years old, I vowed to not grow up poor. I didn't want to be in poverty because I was very, very tired of the instability.
After high school, Tim moved to Florida with his aunt and uncle who were Christians. While there, he adopted their faith as his own.
I did give my heart to Jesus Christ at that time, but my life following that point was very lukewarm with the Lord.
As Tim began to drift from God, he focused on the vow he made at 13, to not live in poverty. At 24, he became a patrol officer in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. To him, it was more than having stability.
I always felt a strong passion to protect